Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friends Talk Money. I'm Pam Kruger, co-host of Money Track on public television and founder of WealthRamp.com.
I'm Richard Eisenberg, a personal finance writer and editor, and formerly the editor of the Money and Work channels for the PBS site for people over 50, nextavenue.org.
And I'm Terry Savage, nationally syndicated personal finance columnist and the author of The Savage Truth on Money.
We're three friends who like to talk money and all the issues that come with it.
On this podcast, we're trying to help you understand your personal finances
to get you and your retirement on the right path for true financial peace of mind.
Hello and welcome everyone to a very special podcast. I'm flying on Cloud 9 today and I'm joined by Larry Kotlikoff, famed economist. You've seen him on our podcast before. He's the Social Security expert, among many other things, who wrote the book, the bestseller. It's a bestseller about Social Security a few years back called Get What's Yours from Social Security. And Pam and Richard, we have some very exciting news for you today. But first, let me give you a little bit of background. If you saw our previous podcast about Social Security clawbacks, or if you've been reading things, you know, or if you watched this on 60 Minutes, for sure we're going to put a link to the 60 Minutes show that aired with Anderson Cooper early last November, where we broke this story. And the story is this: Social Security has been in the process of clawing back $21.6 billion mistakes they made and just are finding in payments to millions of Americans who are on Social Security retirement benefits or disability benefits. And how did we find this story? We're talking about, at terrysavage.com, I have an Ask Terry blog, and I answer questions all the time. And a woman wrote to me saying, I'm a widow. I'm 73 years old. I just had triple heart bypass surgery, almost had another heart attack. Social Security sent me a letter saying I owed $87,000 and I had 30 days to repay it or they were going to cut off my benefits. I was shocked. I thought, there's got to be a mistake. I can fix that. I'm Terry Savage, right? And that was the beginning of an education. I wrote a column about it. I couldn't get through to Social Security, but I wrote the column anyway after asking them to talk to me. And then out of the woodwork came literally hundreds of emails. I called Larry, who was the guru of Social Security, and said, Larry, what? He said, these are horror stories. I've heard many of them. I'll tell you what to do, Terry. He said, write another one. Let's put some together, and then we'll write a book about it. Well, I solicited stories, and these are the most painful stories ever. We do have a book out and a website. The website is socialsecurityhorrorstories.com. You can get our book. It's in the center of that. It's linked on Amazon. And the best thing that happened to us is that I worked for CBS in Chicago a long time, have a lot of friends there. I sent the columns and what was happening, hundreds of people writing, the worst stories you could ever imagine. Evicted from their homes, lost their Medicare because their Social Security, their Medicare premiums were deducted from Social Security benefits, but they stopped. They couldn't get answers from Social Security. They wouldn't answer the phone. They never got the same person twice. They never had records to prove it. It was terrible. And it's all in that 60 Minutes story. Larry, before I go on to the great news, is that the way?
Yeah, this is pretty much, the whole thing evolved. You turned to me to start asking some questions about specifics on Social Security, and you came across horror stories. And I said, I've been writing about these for a decade with the title Horror Story. Social Security sues 6-year-old orphan was one of the titles. And guess what? The next day it got waived. Because Social Security only acts when they get embarrassed. That was up till the present, where we have now a new commissioner who's terrific and is taking real action, which we'll tell you about today. But so the basic story was, hey, yeah, Terry, let's collect these stories and write a book. There's enough. And we thought it was I thought it was several hundred a year. Then we find out from Social Security, an office in Chicago, it's 250,000. Then the acting commissioner testifies it's $1 million. Then there's a Freedom of Information Act request from KFF news organization connected with Cox. They've been covering this story as well in an excellent manner. They've been terrific in exposing this at the same time. And they find that it's 2 million. And then just the other day, we were talking to a Social Security lawyer expert named David Camp, who said it's probably closer to 3 million a year. 3 million people getting clawbacks for mistakes Social Security has been making. Some cases are fraud, but the big thing is it could be an overpayment that goes on for years, decades. The longest one we've heard of went on for 45 years. They're clawing back somebody for $175 because they got a benefit as a child for an extra month. And this
Tell us what's happening now.
No,
Now,
okay,
what's
so
breaking news?
I'm so excited we are both so excited about this. So we have a new commissioner. Martin O'Malley was just sworn in 2 months ago, and he's heading up Social Security. You need to understand this. When Anderson Cooper, Larry and I are sitting here with the lights on, and Anderson Cooper is busy interviewing us. And at some point, this obviously didn't make the air, but I turned to him and I said, Anderson, why are you so surprised? What did Social Security tell you? And he said, they wouldn't talk to us. So you have to understand that 3-4 months ago, 60 Minutes called, and they would not talk to 60 Minutes Anderson Cooper.
Wow. So listen, I want to ask a question here.
Wait. Fast forward. We now have a new commissioner, Martin O'Malley, and former mayor of Baltimore. He is sworn in. It turns out, we were just told, we've been invited to some very inside meetings with the people that are advising the commissioner. He's watched that 60 Minutes. What did they say, Larry? 6 or 7 times, and all the notes that were associated with it. And he made testimony to Congress just a week ago. And yes, when this came out, as we were having one of our meetings, one of the guys says, look, here's a memo to staff that the commissioner just put out. And here are the 2 key notes. Number 1, he said to his staff, effective immediately, we will no longer claw back all of someone's benefits, wipe out all their Social Security check. It will be limited to 10% of the benefit. That's astounding, because they were threatening 30 days pay and they stopped payment. That is really astounding. He said in the memo, it'll take us a few weeks to get our systems to generate notices that have the 10% limitation. So we said, staff, I'm counting on you. If anybody calls in, this is critical, I want you to know this. If anybody calls in, you have to manually adjust so that they're getting at least 90% of their check. 10% or $10, whichever is greater, is the maximum clawback. So right now I want to stop this podcast and tell all of you, if you know someone who had their entire check taken or the vast majority of their check taken, they are supposed to call in now. I mean, immediately after you finish watching this podcast, to Social Security. It's 800-772-1213. That's a main Social Security number. And by the way, they're getting the call times, the delays down a lot. 800-772-1213. And all you have to do is say 10%. You've been taking my check. Start it again. You can only take 10%. That's the headline. That's one of the headlines. And it's the big news. I'll let you guys go.
Because this was a wow when we did the podcast, and then we watched the 60 Minutes. Now, my quick question was, and I think you kind of answered it already, really after the 60 Minutes interview is when it seems to me, as following along, that the dialogue and then guiding this new commissioner to include some of Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's team involved and actually take action. And it kind of makes me want to say, and it's not a diss to AARP, but it's like, you guys, this is huge. I mean, this is amazing that this actually was able to happen, and the power of.
Well, and another thing,
you have to hear the Janet Yellen story. What can you say about that, Larry? Well, you can talk about it.
Richard, let me just,
Yeah, let Richard.
what did
I
you
was just
have?
going to say, it's another thing it seems that they're doing now is changing the burden of proof. Can you talk about that? It seems like it used to be the burden of proof was on the person getting the Social Security checks, and now the burden of proof is on Social Security. Can you talk about what's going on there?
Well, that's yeah, just, well, first of all, Secretary Yellen is the chief trustee of Social Security. So she's had people at Treasury interacting with us and interacting with the commissioner. So everybody's kind of working together. Also, members of Congress in both the Senate and the House have been talking, and then the lawyer team group. So there's a lot of people interacting with the commissioner. Now, one of the things he said is that there would be a statute of limitations. He hasn't made clear exactly what that means. We've been pushing for 18 months so that if you're a clawback, if they've been overpaying you for more than 18 months, the clawback should not be from, after 18 months, it's their mistake,
It
it's
would
on
just
them.
go.
And I think he is pushing that direction. Then there's also the issue of the burden of proof. I mean, most of these clawbacks, almost all of them come with, you owe us X, and we have no obligation to tell you why or how we came up with that number or give you any proof. And too bad, trust us. And then you might even pay off that bill, and then you get another big bill the next day. All out of it's like worse than a Kafka novel. And we've seen people send us emails where they record that they've gotten like 20 different emails over the last 2.5 months with different amounts with no explanation.
Ugh.
That craziness, so there's a lot of things that he still has to do and then
So
there's,
how's the burden of proof changing though? What's changing there?
well, he has said that they have to kind of explain where the clawback's coming from. So for example, if you, Richard, had worked for a state of Illinois, which is not covered by Social Security as a teacher, and are getting a non-covered pension from the state of Illinois, that should reduce your retirement benefit and also any dependent benefits you receive through two provisions called the WEP and the GPO. But anyway, if they would have to say, well, we found out that your pension was X and we properly adjusted your benefit according to the WEP and the GPO. But if they don't have any evidence that you got this, maybe, they also make mistakes in the other direction, which is that they underpay you, or they decide the date, here they are saying they made a mistake for X number of decades for you, okay? But how do we know that it's not itself a mistake, that they're not making a mistake about their mistake? Unless they provide proof. So there's been no due process here. So this is
Well,
like
I think the two of you are going to get job offers to go to work for the Social Security.
I volunteer. My next job is going to be the ombudsman, because I've been staying up late at night reading all these stories that we solicited at socialsecurityhorrorstories.com. I'm now going to send an email out to everyone who wrote us or posted that, number one, call them, because if your money was taken away, the max they're now taking is 10%. But what Larry's talking about is that most of these notices, if you call and say, wait, what's this all about? They just say, because we said so, we recalculated. And now what the commissioner has said in testimony to Congress last week was the burden of proof is no longer on the claimant who gets this notice, the person gets it, but on the agency to prove that, in fact, these new calculations are correct. Lawyers don't want to take these cases because there's no money in it for them, but the good lawyers that do take these cases can never get the facts behind the calculations because the agency's computer systems are so messed up. But let's focus on the moment.
So yeah, let me just add to that, Terry, which is that, and respond to Richard here, if the commissioner says the burden of proof is on the agency, and then the agency cannot come up with a proof, he's got to go to the next step and say, put into regulations, internal regulations, that they drop the case, that they waive the clawback. So there are many steps that have to be taken here, including how you treat people that have already been paid back their money with no evidence that they actually were overpaid being presented. And how are they going to be, are their cases going to be reopened? And then we also, let me say this last thing, which is what's needed for the commissioner to do, which is to make sure there's a central office that adjudicates everything rather than 10,000 claim reps
Right.
who
So,
wake up.
so Larry, Terry, two things. And I do want to circle back to that question about what happens if it's after the fact. One of the things that came up, well, the first comment I wanted to make is it really seems like Martin O'Malley, the new commissioner, is taking responsibility and accountability. I've never heard the Social Security Administration talk like this. He's even using your words, cruel system with the clawbacks. And so, kudos to him for making this happen. But do you guys think that in order to make some of these things that you're now starting to talk about, Larry, happen, you're going to need a whole new division of Social Security just to deal with this? How are they going to really, how are they going to be able to do that?
I think they need to have a centralized group and not, where there's a director and that director reports to the former governor of Maryland, as well as the former mayor, Martin O'Malley, or whoever is the commissioner. And there's a final adjudication. And it's also not just that they don't have the proof. So that'd be one reason to waive it. But also it could be waived because it goes against the purpose of the act, which is to provide a safety net. And then the other reason that you can drop a case legally is that if it goes against equity and good conscience, putting somebody on the street, for example, or going after a 32-year-old for benefits that his mom received on his behalf at age 11, that's against equity and good conscience. Against the purpose of the act would be just, we've taken this, let's say, middle class couple, and we're hitting them up with $100,000, and this is half of the retirement income wealth, or a third of it. That's just, forget about it.
Are you suggesting that they will create sort of a centralized, like a,
Well, we're pushing
like a different
for
division?
that.
We're trying.
We're pushing, Terry and I just put out a letter that we're sharing with the Treasury Secretary and trying to get to the commissioner's hands that says, here's the extra 5 things you need to do. The
But that could be,
10%
it could be hard to get that to happen at a time when Congress keeps taking money away from the Social Security Administration, not giving more money to them, don't you think?
Well,
No.
Terry, you go respond.
Yeah, look, this clawback issue has nothing to do. We'll do another podcast about the future of Social Security and its inherent. That's not it.
Well, they have a budget. They have a budget that they've got to deal with.
But the fact of the matter is, the budget, their operating budget, which is stressed and doesn't have the right computer systems, has nothing whatsoever to do with their job to fairly distribute the trust funds that people have contributed to through their work, their employers contributed over the years. They have made mistakes, and the act requires them to act. The written words, and it's been adjudicated in court in the 90s, that they must follow the precepts of, quote, equity and good conscience, and they must follow the purposes of the inherent purposes of the act, which are to create a safety net. And those particular issues, and they must also follow the legal precedents of due process. All of that for the last 5, 6, 8 years, maybe even longer, has been murky, to say the least, to be charitable. Yes, their systems are a mess and they need money they're operating on COBOL, which was programmed in the 70s or whatever. But they have an absolute duty, a sacred duty and responsibility to the beneficiaries to manage that trust fund accurately, fairly, within the principles of Social Security. And this has nothing to do with the fact that when there are a lot of old people and few young people working, we're going to have to fix something down the road. So let's leave that aside. This is about today and about the people they have been taking advantage of, because they were all, until this whole thing came bubbling to the surface, partly through those columns, partly through our book, other ways, people were old, disabled, elderly, and they had no one to turn to, and they got, stiff-armed when they tried to call Social Security. Sorry, I'm passionate. I'll stop. Larry, take over.
That brings up my next question, which is, let's go back to talking about the people who already, that already had this situation, years ago, and what the remedies are there.
I think the remedy, the only correct remedy is to reopen their case if they desire, ask to have it reopened.
Yeah, they've already paid it back. Now,
Especially if there's been a statute of limitations of 18 months and they're being clawed back for, you know, I've seen a clawback for $304,000 of a disabled person. And over, you know, it was overpayments for decades, for years. And, you know, if the 18 months is going to be put into place, if that's what the commissioner goes with, that should apply to everybody. Now, that's going to cost some money, as Richard's pointing out.
yeah,
But let's think about, this is a drop in the bucket relative to the red ink of the system. It's 65.9 trillion. So going after disabled, poor people, or even middle-class people, and you know, destroying their retirement and engaging in cruel and unusual financial abuse, that's not Social Security's purpose in life here. And they're not, you know, if they have to pay, you know, $500 billion, that's a drop in the bucket relative to the 65.9 trillion that the trustees report says on table 6F1. You can read it, pick it up right on Google, that they're short 65 point. So if it costs even $500 billion, it's peanuts compared to the problem. We have to fix Social Security more
That's a good
fundamentally. That's our next podcast.
Can I
Richard.
ask a question? I want to ask about something else the Social Security Commissioner said recently. So I'm just going to read it. He said, "We will be making it much easier for overpaid beneficiaries to request a waiver of repayment in the event they believe themselves to have been without any fault and or without the ability to repay." I wonder, Larry and Terry, can you talk a little bit about what you think about that and how they're going to make it easier? And is that something you were calling for?
Well, yeah, I think there should be, that's what we need to have, one agency. So it's not somebody who's nasty and mean decide, you know, and that's been the case. There's been 10,000 different people adjudicating whether they should go after Richard and how hard to be, and whether to give forgiveness, or whether you actually deserve equity and good conscience. So we need to have one central group within Social Security that can say, well, yeah, it was their, you know, we weren't given the information, we're going to claw back for 18 months, or they just can't afford, it's just too extreme. We're not going to sue a 6-year-old. I've seen them sue a 6-year-old. And as soon as it became public, because I wrote it in my column, Social Security sues 6-year-old orphan, was an orphan for overpayment, that was dropped the next minute. So they have the power to obey their law.
okay, so in the
law
meantime,
says that-
until they get that central sort of, they get their act together that way, you're saying that on an individual level, you guys are saying that, you know, he's saying, look, you can contact us, you can call this number, you can actually.
That's so critical, Pam. He said this. So this is really important. The commissioner has said, first of all, he didn't say we're going to get this done by the end of the year. He said we're going to get this done in the next few weeks, the 10%. I'm so excited about this, as Larry has clearly told you, and much more calmly than I did, that there's a lot left to be done. There's a lot left to be done. People are in the system for this. There have been horrendous abuses. But the big word to get out now is that if you call Social Security now, and they, again, one of these advisors, we were in this inside meeting, said, you know what? He's pretty proud they've got the call wait times down to 31 minutes or something like that, when it was hours. Call Social Security 800-772-1213. Use the word 10%. If you have had your benefits suspended or majorly cut back, you tell them the commissioner said that immediately, that's as of whatever this was yesterday, March 26th, that immediately he had said that 10% was the maximum and you want your benefits restored minus the 10%. That is huge. Now, Larry, I don't know, maybe I'm Pollyanna. Do you honestly believe, maybe I'm just going to try and call that number, but do you honestly believe they're going to be able to immediately next month restore your benefits less 10%?
I think so, yeah, because I think they'll have something in the code where, you know, somebody can hit some key strokes and change your clawback. And yes, I think that's completely doable. I mean, you know, I have a software company on the side, and we
Oh.
could get that kind of thing programmed in half an hour. So yes, absolutely.
Oh, commercial timeout, commercial break here. Now, some of you are out there saying, how will we ever know? Look, we wrote a book, Social Security Horror Stories. It's on Amazon. We could Google Terry Savage, Larry Kotlikoff, you'll find it. I don't know what it costs, but $10 or $15, something like
Put
that.
it in the show
Half
notes.
of the book, and we'll put it in the show notes, we'll put a link. Half of the book was about the clawbacks. I'm not going to let Larry get started right now on all the quote scams, and we use that word that Social Security is running, that compel you to take benefits too early, trick you into taking benefits that work against you if you're a married couple. But I do want to say, and we're going to put this link right front and center. I have nothing to do with this. Larry has a company on which he does not get rich. He keeps pouring money into it. Go to maximizemysocialsecurity.com. maximizemysocialsecurity.com. It costs $39. If you're wondering, when do I take my benefits? Should I let my husband take his Social Security, wait till 70, or should I wait till 70 or take mine first? How do I do that? What's the best way? This will take all of that into account. Social Security can't do that because they won't tell you about your spouse's benefits. And those people are so
I've
uneducated
used the
that
software, I
the
love
odds
it.
better
It
than
analyzes.
50-50.
Yeah.
They'll be wrong if they advise you.
Yeah.
Maximizemysocialsecurity.com. It's in the show notes at Friends Talk.
I've got another question for you, Terry and Larry. So I'm really glad to see that Social Security is actually doing something about this and helping people who should be getting the help that they're going to get, presumably. What I'm not understanding is partly sort of what caused this to happen to begin with, not what caused the changes, but what caused people to get the wrong amounts of money, supposedly. Why is Social Security telling them that they were overpaid? But more importantly, what is Social Security doing in its system so that those things won't happen in the future? Are they working with payroll companies? Are they doing anything else so that we'll see less of this happening going forward, Larry?
Yeah, well, so Governor O'Malley has set up a system whereby payroll companies like ADP can report to Social Security. So it will capture a fair amount of payroll, but they should have been doing this decades ago. And frankly, what's been going on for years is that they haven't had the information to calculate your benefit correctly. You work for the state of Illinois as a teacher or fireman or whatever, policeman, and they didn't know. So, and they didn't want to actually tell you, Richard, we don't know the number we need to know in order to cut your benefits. So Richard, please tell us. They're really in a catch-22 situation. So they didn't tell people clearly enough and strongly enough. They'd say around the edges, you need to tell us. And then if you did tell them, their staff was so bad that they wouldn't actually enter the information. Or they, if you said, well, this is going to happen to me in 3 months when you start my Social Security, they'll say, some clerk will say, fine, you're all set, go home. For the next 15 years, you're getting a benefit that's too high because they forgot to put it into the system. Where they said, well, somebody said, well, we can't put it in until we actually see some documentation that that's the right number. So it's been a mess. This whole thing has just been dysfunctional. And
let's make one other point. When your boss pays you, just along that line to explain more clearly, you're supposed to get you get a 1099 from your Illinois Fireman's Pension Fund that said you were paid $42,000 in pensions, and you pay taxes on it. The IRS will match it up and you're going to pay taxes. That's ordinary income, your pension. But they never sent a copy of that 1099 to Social Security and said, adjust this person's Social Security because there's this thing called the WEP, the windfall elimination provision. So adjust their Social Security downward. Now you may have told Social Security, you told the person you talked to, by the way, there's no record of it, no phone call, no taping. Yes, I'm going to get a pension. This is very complex. And Social Security never got their copy of the 1099, the one you give to your accountant and say, put this on my tax return. And so that accounts for many of these long-term overpayments, but not all of them. A lot of them were terrible miscalculations that revolved around disability that someone later decides 20 years later, oh, that person wasn't. Larry, talk about the child that was on 15 Minutes. that was,
Pam-
they said he didn't have cerebral, well, go ahead.
Yep, but Pam, you had a question, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to just note here, this is like a moment in history. I've never heard you ever encouraged about Social Security actually being able to remedy, you know, a problem. Larry's always the one to, Terry, to ring the bell and say, look, this has to be fixed. And I'm encouraged because I'm hearing you guys being encouraged for the very first time. But anyway, yeah, let's go back to the story that you were just going to mention.
Well, this is the story of a person who was one of the 3 victims that Anderson Cooper featured on the 60 Minutes show that Terry and I appeared on. And so this is a guy named Roy Farmer who had cerebral palsy and still has it. He had 3 operations before he was age 11. Somebody at Social Security, they claim that some doctor or nurse came to visit with him at age 11 and said, well, you can now walk since you've had your 3 operations, and therefore we're going to cut you off from getting your supplemental security income, your welfare benefit. And his mom objected, and anyway, she continued to get the benefits while she was objecting. He knew nothing about it. He's age 32. He gets a clawback letter in the mailbox for $5,000, and no explanation. It takes him 2 years to find out that he was adjudicated at age 11 not to effectively have cerebral palsy when he still has it. He's working at a pretty low wage job. $5,000 is a lot of money for him, and he's not up for it, up to pay something he doesn't understand. After 2 years, he finally finds out that he was determined not to have cerebral palsy when he has it. And then he said, well, let's see the proof. Let me see the evidence of the doctor's visit. Let me see the doctor's report or the nurse's report. Oh, we don't have that. We don't have any documentation. Just pay up. And that person was forgiven. His clawback was waived along with the other 2 people on the 60 Minutes show. At the end of the show, they wouldn't talk to Anderson. The acting commissioner would not talk to Anderson on the 60 Minutes, but they did not want to be completely embarrassed, so they waived those 3 cases.
They did it.
The moral of the story was, first of all, they have the legal right to waive, outrageously abusive things that go against equity and good conscience. And then the other lesson was you need to know Anderson Cooper. You need to be on that show, or you need to know Terry Savage. But fortunately, we have somebody with some, it just shows you the power of one really good person in government to run things. Frankly, I would love Martin O'Malley to be president tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah, me too. You
But I
got my,
was gonna say, Larry, you ran for president a few years ago. Now I feel like you've got a campaign platform for the next time you want to run.
don't care.
Oh, I think they're
But,
gonna make you.
I do have one more
Too young,
serious
Richard.
question. I've got one serious question, which is, do you have reason to believe that we're going to see fewer clawbacks in the future than we saw before? And if so, why do you think so? I can see what they're doing to help people who've been wronged. I'm not sure I was saying what they're doing, so there's not going to be any more of them going forward.
I think they're going to have, if there's an 18-month statute, that will help a lot. I think they're trying to
Statute
get
of limitations.
information.
Yeah, and
They know
that
they
hasn't
need-
happened yet. You're saying that that's what you're proposing. You and Terry are proposing 18-month statute
We
of
proposed
limitations.
it in our book and on 60 Minutes, but also the commissioner said publicly he was going to do it. So that's a big deal.
That I didn't know.
He's doing what he says he's going to do. It seems we're, as we watch. So will this continue? It may, but he's trying to change the culture of the organization overnight. And that's a big job. There's like 77,000 employees or so, 70,000 employees, this institution, and
No, don't let them off the hook.
their philosophy has been, or their culture used to be, bend over backwards to help people. In the last 30 years, it's been bend over backwards to grab every single penny, even if it puts somebody out of their house onto the street. That's not America.
Terry, I want to ask you, since the 60 Minutes aired, since this announcement came out from the Social Security Administration, what have you heard from your viewers after the fact? Have you heard back from anybody recently?
Oh, my goodness. I've been in correspondence with a number of them. It's extraordinarily painful. I stay up late doing this. And the day before, just 2 days ago, at this meeting with the advisors, I mean, it was very nice of them to let Larry and me inside and talk. This is what we told the commissioner. What do you think about that? To Larry particularly. I had received a letter from a woman named Teresa, which is a long letter, which I forwarded to this insider and said, please use this as an example. I've been living in my house for 45 years. I'm about to be evicted. I paid back what they said. Then they said I owed more. They have stopped my benefits. Now I don't have Medicare anymore because they were taking my Medicare premiums. This was a long, extraordinarily painful email I received 2 days ago. It's still going on. Believe you me, I emailed her back and said, I just forwarded your email without anything. She gave me her information to the man who has got the ear of the commissioner. I'm going to not stop until we get this woman, and I'm sending out, as I said, emails to all the people that ever send us their stories, telling them to call the Social Security now about the 10%. If I gave up, I mean, what good would I do? I'm hopeful.
My big concern is that we have an election, a new administration comes in, and all these things get reversed. We go back to the old days. I'll just give you an example of the person I've been interacting with, who's a British lady. She thought we had decent reporting from the employers to Social Security. So she's disabled. She has anxiety, depression. And anyway, COVID hits. She gets called by the local nursing home where people are, fleeing the other nurses or dying. And she goes in and works. And she's been on disability and she earns a little bit too much money. And she gets clawed back $24,000, which she couldn't afford because she put her life on the line to help during COVID. And so then she calls Social Security and she talks to one of the 10,000 people, and they say, well, we're going to cut your clawback to 10% of the total. So you're going to get a check for 90% of what you were otherwise receiving. She says, great. But then there's this catch, which is she has to show up in front of an administrative law judge. And these people have basically been trained to turn people down. So I'm very concerned that the commissioner not just say it's 10%, but that it's 10% permanently, and that it's not going to be, 10%, and that, during this period, we're just going to add to what you owe 90%. And at some point, it's going to be an even bigger clawback, because unless that's in black and white, that could happen. So I'm very concerned about the black and white, because
there's a ton of follow-up that has to come from this. And I just, I think that and I'm speaking for Richard too. I mean, we're just like so thankful and honored that, you're on the inside of this, and that you are really heroes and you've done what you've done. And I don't know if you need to align or somehow, get AARP involved, or, I don't know how this, as you say, this is right now where we are right now, how we stay, on the right direction with this, but it's just incredible.
I've seen the key members of Congress have said that they are going to be on it, that they're going to be sure that this does not go away, that Social Security does what they say they're going to do. So I feel like there are some people in Washington who are actually keeping an eye out. But I do think Larry's right that we probably need legislation to enact this into a statute that says from now on, this is the law of the land. If this happens, 10%.
Guess what? Well, two things. Let me answer, and then you have to finish with how Janet Yellen was so concerned. The minute you open up the Pandora's box of legislation on Social Security, it becomes political. This clawback issue is already in statute. All the commissioner has to do, and he is doing it, and for which we thank him, is follow the basic tenets.
Not the 10%. The 10% is not in statute.
But the fact is that they can make any rules around it, because they made the rules of the 100% clawback around it. So the commissioner clearly knows he has the power to, and has already announced, can make any rules. The minute
I'm worried about the next one.
Let watch this. That's the problem. The minute this becomes, however, a political issue, which is, it's already in the campaign now about who really wants that safe Social Security, who wants to cut it. I mean, that's he said, she said. But the reassuring thing, and I think a vote of thanks, Larry's connection to Janet Yellen, which you should explain because she's the chief trustee.
Well, I just want to say that I think the Republican members of Congress are as upset about what's going on here as the Democrats. The former commissioner, acting commissioner was in front of Congress. Commissioner O'Malley was confirmed and has appeared before Congress. The Republicans, I think it's not a Democrat Republican thing. I think it's a human being versus Neanderthal thing, to tell you the truth. But I do agree with Richard that it has to be in law ultimately, so it's not a flipping back and forth. Janet Yellen is the Secretary of Treasury. She's also the chief trustee of Social Security. She happens to be my first macroeconomics professor in grad school. I've known Janet for decades. Her husband is George Akerlof, Nobel Prize winner in economics. Her son is Bobby Akerlof, who was on my podcast a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
These are close friends.
Right.
And I've been down to grab dinner with Janet. I talked to her about, even 2 years ago about these horror stories.
Yeah.
And before I knew how big they were, and she said, well, it could be that the trustee has the power to help here. And she has jumped on this and has assigned two of her very top people at Treasury to be in touch with the people at Social Security and the commissioner, and she meets with the commissioner. So we have a lot of people, including the commissioner himself, who are pushing for change. So right now, at least, things are going exactly in the right direction. We could not be more happy.
Yeah, this is,
But
listen,
I
thanks.
wouldn't say, I mean, I appreciate, being called a hero, but I think it's just anybody who's got common sense and a heart.
No, it's, listen, between your power with knowing Janet and getting that to potentially happen, Terry's connection to getting this on national television on 60 Minutes, which is the place. I mean, you just are, you've done something that is
We're
nothing
lucky.
short of a miracle in terms.
And being on the Friends Talk Money podcast, don't forget that.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Thanks.
We're going to continue to, obviously, we're going to follow this. We're going to follow the tracks. I have never seen you, Larry, smile so much and talk about the Social Security Administration going in the right direction in the same sentence ever. So I don't know how to thank the two of you. Tens of millions of people thank you for, making this, it's absolutely a huge act that you've been able to turn this around. And
Keep up the good work.
Let's get more to come. Thank you.
You'll look forward to hearing more. So
thanks for having us.
bye, everybody, for now.
All right.
Friends Talk Money is funded in part by a grant from the Investor Protection Trust. The IPT is a nonprofit organization devoted to investor education. Since 1993, the IPT has worked with the states to provide the independent, objective investor education needed by all Americans to make informed investment decisions. Visit investorprotection.org. We also receive support from the North American Securities Administrators Association, known as NASA. It's the oldest international investor protection organization. NASA's members include state and provincial securities regulators from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico who serve on the front lines of investor protection. Recognizing that education and awareness are powerful tools in the fight against investment fraud, NASA is pleased to sponsor Friends Talk Money. Here are 3 important tips to help you protect your money from fraud. With investing, there are always risks, so be cautious of anybody telling you that a certain investment is guaranteed. You should also proceed with caution if somebody is promising very large investment returns. This is a common red flag for investment fraud. Last and most importantly, be sure you're working with a licensed or registered financial professional. You can check your advisor and make sure they're licensed by visiting brokercheck.finra.org. NASA is your partner in keeping you safe and helping you avoid investment frauds. Visit nasa.org and click on the Investor Education tab to learn more.